It was a cold November evening in a small town in Ohio, the kind of night where the wind cuts straight through an old jacket and the streetlights flicker like they're running on their last breath. The little 24-hour convenience store on Maple Street was almost empty, just the hum of the refrigerators, the faint smell of hot dogs spinning on rollers that nobody had bought in hours, and the tired fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Thomas Reed stood in the bread aisle, staring at the shelves as if they held the answer to a question he'd been asking for 15 years. He was tall, but the years had bent him forward a little, like a tree that had weathered too many storms. His green army field jacket, faded, patched in places with duct tape, was the only thing he still owned from his old life. The beard that covered his face was more gray than brown now, unkempt and wild, and his eyes carried the hollow look of someone who had stopped expecting tomorrow to be any different from today. He hadn't eaten since the morning before last. A kind church lady in the last town had given him half a tuna sandwich and a bottle of water, but that was 40 miles and 2 long nights ago. His stomach no longer growled. It had given up protesting and settled into a dull, constant ache. In his pocket were 3 quarters and a nickel 80 cents total. He turned them over in his calloused fingers like worry beads. On the shelf in front of him sat a plain loaf of white bread, nothing fancy, no seeds, no artisan crust, just soft, ordinary slices. The orange price tag read $3, 29. Thomas picked it up anyway, feeling the small weight of it in his hands, the plastic bag crinkling softly. For a moment he stood there, perfectly still, as if the world had paused to watch what he would do next. He thought about putting it back. He really did. He had survived worse than hunger, freezing nights in the Hindu Kush, gunfire that never seemed to stop, the screams of men he couldn't save. He had once gone 5 days without food on a mission, chewing pine needles to keep the nausea away. A grown man, a soldier, a Green Beret, reduced to this, stealing bread like some character out of an old novel. But the ache in his gut won. The memory of warm toast his mother used to make when he was a kid flashed across his mind. Butter melting into the soft center, the smell filling the kitchen. He closed his eyes for just a second, then slipped the loaf inside his jacket, pressing it flat against his ribs. The plastic rustled loudly in the quiet store, but the teenage cashier was scrolling on his phone behind the counter and didn't look up. Thomas took a slow breath and started walking toward the door, trying to look casual, like a man who had paid and was simply leaving. His boot, scracked leather held together with paracord, made almost no sound on the linoleum floor. 10 more steps, 8, 5, the automatic door slid open with a tired chime. Cold air rushed in. Freedom was right there. Beep, beep, beep. The security alarm screamed like a wounded animal. The cashier's head snapped up. Hey, stop. Thomas didn't run. He had stopped running from anything a long time ago. He just froze in the doorway, 1 foot in the store, 1 foot out on the cracked sidewalk, as red and blue lights suddenly painted the parking lot. 2 police officers getting coffee next door had heard the alarm. They moved fast. One grabbed his arm. The other took him down hard onto the cold pavement. The impact knocked the wind out of him. The loaf slipped from under his jacket and hit the ground with a soft thud, splitting open. Slices scattered across the dirty concrete like white cards from a deck. Hands behind your back, one officer shouted, knee pressing between Thomas's shoulder blades. The handcuffs clicked cold and final around his wrists. The younger officer picked up the broken loaf, staring at it in confusion. Bread, you risked jail. For bread. Thomas turned his face to the side, cheek against the freezing ground, and spoke so quietly they almost didn't hear him. I was hungry, sir. That's all. Just hungry. The officers hauled him to his feet. People had started gathering. Phones out, recording. Thomas didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on the scattered slices, already soaking up oil and dirt from the pavement, and felt something inside him break. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet snap, like a dry twig under snow. As they pushed him into the back of the cruiser, the last thing he saw before the door slammed was the cashier standing in the doorway, holding the empty plastic bag that had once held a simple loaf of bread, looking suddenly very young and very unsure about the world. The holding cell smelled like bleach and old coffee. The bench was a slab of painted metal bolted to the wall, cold enough to numb anything it touched. Thomas sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the scuffed floor between his boots. The cuffs had come off, but the red marks still circled his wrists like bracelets he couldn't remove. Across the room, behind the duty desk, officers moved in slow motion, filing reports, answering phones, pretending not to watch him. The young cashier from the store had already given his statement and left. The loaf of bread sat in an evidence bag on a shelf, looking smaller and sadder than anything worth stealing. Officer Ramirez, the rookie who had helped tackle him, kept glancing over. He was barely 25, still had that new cop shine. After 20 minutes he couldn't stand it anymore. He poured a cup of station coffee, thick as tar and burnt from sitting too long, and grabbed the leftover half of a turkey sand, which someone had abandoned in the fridge. He walked to the cell door. "Here," he said, sliding the tray through the slot. "It's not much, but it's something." Thomas looked up slowly. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and distant. For a second, Ramirez thought he wouldn't take it, like accepting kindness would cost more than he could pay. Then Thomas reached out, hands surprisingly steady, and wrapped both around the paper cup like it was the warmest thing he'd touched in years. "Thank you," he said, voice rough from disuse. "You didn't have to do that." Ramirez shrugged, awkward. "Everybody gets hungry." Thomas gave a small, tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not everybody gets caught." They ran his fingerprints first, standard procedure for any theft, even bread. The desk sergeant, a heavy man named Kowalski with 30 years on the job, typed the name Thomas J. Read into the system while sipping his own coffee. The computer thought for a long time. Then it returned almost nothing. No priors, no warrants, no parking tickets. Just an old Department of Defense record and a military ID photo from 2008. Thomas clean, shaven, square, jawed, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Kowalski whistled low. Green Beret, Sergeant First Class, honorable discharge. Wait, no, it says retired, but the date's blank. Weird. He printed the single page anyway and walked it over to the cell. Thomas was eating the sandwich in tiny, careful bites, making it last. "Says here you served, Sergeant." Kowalski said, softer than before. "Special Forces. That true?" Thomas nodded once. "Then why the hell are you boosting Wonder Bread in my town?" Thomas wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Long story, Sergeant. Longer than either of us has tonight." Kowalski studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Look, it's just a loaf. Owner probably won't even press charges. We'll cite and release you in an hour. Get you to the shelter before it closes. They've got cots and hot food." Thomas didn't answer right away. He finished the last bite, folded the wax paper neatly, and set it back on the tray like he was turning in a weapon for inspection. "I've been through worse holding cells than this one," he said finally. "Kandahar, Bagram, places without names. This one's not so bad." Ramirez, listening from the desk, felt his stomach twist. He thought of his own grandfather, a Vietnam vet who never talked about the war but sometimes woke up shouting. He wondered what kind of worse Thomas Reid had seen. The fingerprint tech came back with the final confirmation. Clean, no matches in any civilian database. Kowalski started filling out the release form. The station settled into its late night rhythm, radio crackle, distant coughing from another cell, the heater kicking on with a groan. Thomas leaned his head back against the cinder block wall and closed his eyes. For the first time in months, maybe years, he wasn't moving, no hitchhiking, no looking over his shoulder. Just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of burnt coffee. He let himself drift, almost asleep. Then the phone on Kowalski's desk rang. Sharp, urgent, not the usual civilian line. Kowalski picked it up. Maple Ridge PD, Sergeant Kowalski. He listened. His face changed in stages. Confusion, then disbelief, then something close to fear. The pen in his hand stopped moving. "Yes, sir. I mean, ma'am, he's right here. Yes, in custody. For bread. Yes, really." A long pause. Understood. Right away. He hung up and stared at the receiver like it had bitten him. Every officer in the room turned. That was the FBI. Kowalski said, voice strangely flat. They're on their way. Black SUV. No local field office call. Just direct from D.C., they said. They said do not process him. Do not release him. Do not let him out of our sight. Ramirez felt the hairs on his neck stand up. For stealing bread. Kowalski looked through the bars at Thomas, who had opened his eyes and was watching them with the calm of a man who had long ago stopped being surprised by anything. No, Kowalski said quietly. They said, and I quote, "You have no idea who you're holding." Thomas stood up slowly, stretching his back like a man coming off a long march. He met Kowalski's eyes through the bars. Guess the story just got longer than tonight after all, he said, and for the first time since they'd dragged him in, the faintest trace of something, relief, maybe, or resignation, crossed his face. The first black SUV hadn't even come to a complete stop before the doors flew open. Two more followed right behind, tires hissing on the wet asphalt of the Maple Ridge Police parking lot. No lights, no sirens, just the low growl of government engines and the sharp slam of doors that sounded like punctuation marks on a night that had already gone sideways. 4 agents stepped out in perfect synchronization, moving like people who had done this 100 times in places far less friendly than small town Ohio. Dark suits, no overcoats despite the freezing drizzle, earpieces catching the streetlight. The lead agent was a woman in her mid-50s, short steel, gray hair, posture like a blade. She carried a thick red folder under one arm with the word classified stamped across it in letters big enough to read from 10 feet away. Inside the station, every officer froze mid-motion. Coffee cups hovered halfway to mouths. Kowalski stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. The woman didn't break stride. She walked straight to the front desk, placed one hand flat on the counter, and spoke in a voice that expected obedience. Agent Harlan, FBI Counterintelligence. Sergeant Thomas J. Reed, you will take me to him immediately. Kowalski opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Ma'am, with respect, he lifted a $3 loaf of bread. We were about to cut him loose. Harlan's eyes flicked to the evidence bag with the squashed bread still inside, then back to Kowalski. Chief, you have no idea who you're holding. Open the cell. That's not a request. Ramirez felt the air leave the room. He had seen federal agents on training videos, but never in real life, and certainly not 4 of them descending on their 12-man department because of a hungry veteran. They moved Thomas to the larger interview room at the back, the one with the one-way mirror nobody ever used because the bulb had burned out years ago. Harlan dismissed the local officers with a single look. Kowalski tried to protest once more, but the other 3 agents simply positioned themselves, one at the door, one in each corner, arms folded, silent. Kowalski left, pulling the door shut behind him with a click that sounded final. Inside the room, it was just Thomas and Agent Harlan now. The red folder sat on the scarred table between them like a sleeping animal. Thomas didn't sit. He stood against the far wall, arms loose at his sides, the way soldiers stand when they're waiting for orders that might never come. His eyes tracked her the way he used to track movement on ridgelines in Kandahar. Calm, patient, ready. Harlan opened the folder. The first page had a black and white photograph paper, clipped to it. Thomas, 15 years younger, standing in desert night, vision green with 4 other men whose faces were now redacted with thick black bars. The official seal at the top was one Thomas hadn't seen on paper in a very long time. Sergeant First Class Thomas James Reed. She began, voice quieter now that they were alone. Operation Night Sparrow, Helmand Province, Afghanistan, September 2011. Official status, killed in action, body never recovered, family notified. Full military honors, except you didn't die that night, did you? Thomas's jaw flexed, the only sign he'd heard her. He said nothing. Harlan turned the page. 52 American and Allied contractors rescued from a Taliban prison compound nobody was supposed to know existed. 0 U.S. Fatalities on the extraction. Enemy commander eliminated. Intel recovered that stopped 3 planned attacks on the homeland. Your team took the credit. Your team got the Silver Stars. Your team attended your memorial. She looked up, but it was you alone who stayed behind. You who spent the next 13 years buried so deep undercover that even most of Langley thought you were a ghost story. New names, new legends, new scars. She slid an 8x10 across the table. Thomas, or whatever his name had been then, standing next to a high-ranking Taliban financier in a bazaar, both of them smiling like old friends. The timestamp was 2019. Thomas finally spoke, voice raw. How did you find me? Your fingerprint hit the due watch list the second Kowalski ran it. System's been looking for you for 18 months, ever since your last handler stopped getting postcards from dead drops in Peshawar. We thought they finally caught you. We were wrong. She closed the folder. For the first time her face softened, just a fraction. You were supposed to come in when the mission ended, Thomas. Debrief, decompress, get your life back. Why did you vanish? He looked at the floor, then at the wall, then finally at her. Because after 13 years of being someone else, I wasn't sure Thomas Reed still existed. And if he did, I didn't know how to face the people I'd left thinking I was dead. Easier to stay gone. Harlan exhaled slowly. Well, Sergeant, tonight you got hungry, and tonight the United States government remembered you're still one of ours. She stood up. Your file isn't staying classified anymore. The director signed the declassification order an hour ago. Tomorrow the world learns what you did. Tonight, we're getting you out of this building into a hot shower and the biggest steak you can eat, and then we're taking you home. Thomas Reed, soldier, ghost, hungry man in a torn army jacket, felt his knees buckle just a little. He caught himself on the edge of the table. Home, he repeated, like the word belonged to someone else's language. Harlan nodded once. Yes, Sergeant, home. The morning sun had barely cleared the rooftops when the first pickup truck pulled up outside the Maple Ridge Diner. Word travels faster than light in a town of 6,000 people, especially when the story involves black SUV, the FBI, and a man who stole bread because he had once saved 50. 2 lives nobody was allowed to talk about. By 8 o'clock, the diner's parking lot looked like a county fair. Veterans in wheelchairs and on Harleys, mothers pushing strollers. Teenagers who had stayed up all night sharing the leaked body. Cam Clip. Farmers in coveralls. The Heiss. Cool marching band in half-dipped uniforms because they'd come straight from practice. Someone had strung an American flag between 2 light poles. Someone else had written "Welcome Home, Thomas" in red spray paint across a white bed sheet and hung it from the diner's roof. Inside, Thomas sat in the corner booth wearing borrowed clothes that actually fits. Oft gray sweatpants and a Marine Corps hoodie a retired gunny had pulled from his trunk. His hair was still damp from the longest shower of his life, taken in the room the FBI had booked for him at the only motel in town. He had shaved for the first time in 3 years. The face in the mirror had startled him. Older, thinner, but undeniably his own again. Agent Harlan sat across from him, drinking black coffee and pretending not to notice the crowd growing outside the plate, glass windows. A porterhouse steak the size of a hubcap sat in front of Thomas, half-eaten. He kept looking at it like he expected it to vanish. You don't have to finish it. Harlan said gently, nobody's grading you. Thomas gave a small laugh that sounded rusty. I'm not sure my stomach remembers how to be full. The diner door chimed every 10 seconds. People didn't ask for autographs or selfies. They just walked up, placed something on the table, said a quiet "thank you for your service," and left before he could answer. A knit cap, a gift card to the hardware store, a child's drawing of a soldier holding a loaf of bread like a rifle, a purple heart from a Vietnam vet who pressed it into Thomas's hand and said, "Mine's lonely, it'll like the company. The convenience store owner, Mr. Patel arrived with his wife and 2 daughters. He carried the same loaf of bread, fresh, not the one from Evidon, wrapped in gold ribbon like a birthday present. His eyes were red. "I am so sorry," he said in his soft accent. "Last night I was angry. Today I am ashamed. This bread is free, all bread, forever, for you and any veteran. I already put a sign." Thomas tried to speak, but Mr. Patel simply bowed, hands together, and backed away. At 9, 30 The mayor showed up with the keys to a small blue house 2 streets over, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, paid off mortgage, donated by a contractor whose own son had served in Fallujah. The deed was already in Thomas's name. The mayor's voice cracked when he handed over the keys. "We don't have much," he said, "but what we have is yours." By 10, the crowd had spilled into the street. Someone started singing "God Bless America" off key, and 500 voices joined in. Thomas watched through the window, hands wrapped around a fresh mug of coffee, afraid to believe any of it was real. Agent Harlan's phone buzzed. She read the screen and slid it across the table so he could see. White House press release, time, stamped 10 minutes ago. Today the president has declassified portions of Operation Night Sparrow, a classified mission conducted between 2011 and 2024. The American people deserve to know the extraordinary courage of the operatives who protected them in silence. Sergeant First Class Thomas J. Reed, previously listed as killed in action, is alive and has been located. His actions saved American lives and prevented attacks on the homeland. We are honored to welcome him home. Below the statement was a single line added personally by the president. "Sergeant Reed, your country owes you more than bread. Dinner is on me anytime you're in D.C." Thomas read it twice, then a third time. His hands started shaking so hard that coffee sloshed onto the table. Harlan reached across and covered his fingers with hers. "It's over," she said. "The hiding." "The alone?" "All of it." He looked up at her, eyes glassy. "I just wanted to not be hungry tonight." Outside, the high school band struck up the Army song. The diner door opened one last time, and Officer Ramirez, the rookie who had given him half a sandwich in the holding cell, walked in, still wearing his uniform. He stopped in front of the booth, came to attention, and snapped the sharpest salute Thomas had seen in 15 years. Then Ramirez dropped the salute, pulled out his wallet, and laid 5 crumpled $20 bills on the table. "For the sandwich I gave you last night," he said, voice thick interest. Thomas stood up slowly. The entire diner went quiet. He walked to Ramirez, pulled the young officer into a hug so tight the duty belt creaked, and whispered something no microphone caught. Ramirez stepped back, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on his cheeks, and nodded. Thomas turned to the window, to the hundreds of faces he didn't know but who somehow knew him now, and raised one hand. Not quite a wave, more like surrender to something too big to fight. The crowd roared. He looked down at the goal, ribboned loaf of bread Mr. Patel had placed beside his plate, picked it up and walked outside. The people parted. He stopped in the middle of the street, held the bread high like a torch, and spoke for the first time loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice was rough, but it carried all the way to the back of the crowd. "All I wanted was bread," he said. "You gave me back my life." Then he tore the loaf in half, steam rising into the cold November air, and started passing pieces to the closest hands, children first, then veterans, then anyone who reached out. By the time the loaf was gone, Thomas Reed was crying openly, surrounded by strangers who felt like family, while the small town Ohio snow began to fall soft and silent on a man who had finally, truly, come home. And somewhere in the cheering, a little girl tugged on his new hoodie and held up her crayon drawing one more time. Thomas knelt, took the picture, and tucked it carefully into his pocket, right over his heart, where it would stay for the rest of his days.